Here to give us an overview of the Institutional Data Council is the Council's Chair and Founder, Associate Vice Chancellor, and Chief Financial Officer, Erin Gore. Please join me now in welcoming to the podium, Erin Gore.
Good afternoon. I have to say I am so excited about everyone gathering here today and starting what I hope is a continued dialogue on campus. I will get to speak about IDC specifically, but when I think about all of you coming together and talking about document retention and specifically electronic document retention, all of my hats come into play. So from the CFO's perspective, I think about how expensive it is for us to think about our documents. And I know through some of the dialogues here and some studies out in industry, one rough estimate, which is not to be used, was that, and I say that as it's all over the web, and this will probably be tagged in YouTube for the rest of my career, but as we look about 5% of the documents and how often do they have to be retained and what's the cost per document and all of these things we need to be more thoughtful about. But one estimate I saw for Berkeley, back of the envelope, very rough, was in this $20 million range. And when I think about, our budget at Berkeley is about $2 billion. And when we think about the cuts we've had and we think about all of the pressures on us, $20 million, that's the same as the entire org simplification exercise, right? So if we were more thoughtful about 5% of our documents, which took up less space, which did different things, that's a lot of money. It's also, when we think about the cuts that we were given last year and we distributed on campus, which was about 30 million, 20 million is a big percentage of that. And so, while in at least some of my units, we've just been moving around a little bit, and our prior philosophy had been to keep every single piece of paper that we've ever had. It's a great opportunity right now to rethink that and to both save money, but also think about the importance of what it is we want to keep, right? So when I think about my role on the Institutional Data Council, it was actually one of the key things in recruiting me for the job. I've almost been on campus 3 years, and I'm really passionate about data. And I'm passionate about data relative to Cal in particular, and that's data in the electronic word form, data in terms of the records we retain, data in general, because it's really the story of who we are, right? And it's both where we've come, but what's important about where we're going. And so as we think about that, and we think about the Institutional Data Council, the simplified version of what it is one question, one answer, right? And I realize in higher education that's a very odd thing to say, because for many things we have multiple answers and multiple versions and multiple sources of the truth. But from the sort of administering the university and thinking about our data, we've been spending a lot of time and energy as a community on what would it mean if for many of our administrative questions we had one answer to it. And how does that help us, right? How does that help reinforce where we're going or what's important to us and help us spend our time on those directional things rather than going around and seeing what the answers are. And I would say on the record retention, from where I sit right now, we're at a great opportunity to help us think through what that means. So where is the source document live? What does it mean to have something go to the archives? What are the things we need to retain? How long do we need to retain them? What does that mean to the systems we're creating? So what do we actually attach as backup, and what are things that we don't need? I'm seeing our new PRA coordinator in the audience. I won't call her out, but it's fascinating to me sometimes when we get the PRAs, because we get these requests for, let's see this document. And so I'm the CFO, I think I own the document, so I send it in, and then when the call goes out, there's actually 52 other ideas of what this could be, and lots of times there's no implications of it, but in other times I think about what does that mean, and how many people have touched this, and what excess frustration or confusion does that cause, and if we were able to streamline it, and maybe my office doesn't need to be involved at all, but it's over here, and that's the source, and we go there, and they're in charge of thinking about how long we keep it, what does that mean for us, and how does that make it easier for us to work? So what I'm hoping from my seat, this group continues to do is help us within the overall policy guidelines of OP develop better working practices and guidelines for us as a community on the electronic and record retention, and then make that recommendation to IDC as here's what we as the campus community think these additional guidelines could be. And that would be a huge help. When you think about IDC and who's on it, we have a web page, which we are getting closer to updating more frequently. It's the idmg.berkeley.edu. And you can see on there the membership. We have the vice chancellors across campus. We have representation from planning and analysis. We have representation from IST. And what we're looking for now, as we've gotten more momentum, are groups like yourself to come up with a recommendation in your subject matter expertise and then have us adopt that, as the policy guidelines for campus. So I'm looking forward to hearing more about that from this group. And with that, I think I still have a few more minutes. I don't know if there's any questions about IDC. I thought there was the ability to do question and answers. Is that true? Was that a farce?
We have questions. Do you have answers?
I may have questions for you, so.
Please take as much time for Erin as you possibly.
Any questions? Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to, I understand who makes up the, I really want to know the reason why the council's in existence. I know,
okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
because I know the membership, and I know, I just want to really have a better understanding of what it is and your role.
Yep. That excellent.
In the whole
Excellent.
data thing here on
So
campus.
about, I want to say 5 years ago now, but don't quote me on that. George Breslauer and Nathan Brostrom. So Nathan was the Vice Chancellor for Administration at the time, and George Breslauer is the Executive Vice Chancellor and Provost, established a committee, and they did both a survey and an extensive cross-campus look at what some of the issues were in terms of collecting data, what some of the conflicts were in terms of multiple data sources, how many definitions could we possibly have for one piece of data on campus, and what did it mean to different folks. And at the end of that, a white paper was produced that was published in late spring of 2009. And what it did was establish out of that working group 6 recommendations. So one was around data decision and directions to establish clear institutional data leadership and a governance structure. And so that's really what formed the IDC. The second was establishing an implementation structure for the initiatives. So it's done that as well. Number 3 was establish and develop common data definitions. And so I'll give an example in student data. Within that, there was a cross-campus working group which came up with student data definitions and student data priorities. And you can see that in the reporting now in Cal Answers. So if you go on the IDMG website, you can see Cal Answers. Anyone in the room with a CalNet ID can get in and use Cal Answers, and you can see many of our institutional student data sets, and they were put in by priority of this group. And in addition to the student data, we have a number of data sets that are going up online. The fourth was identify and implement shared data tools and approaches. So the Cal Answers is an example of that, and we're putting a large number of data sets, many funded by operational excellence, into that. Improve presentation information to decision makers. And so on that, we've had a number of cross-campus forums, and we'll have a symposium this summer in terms of bringing people together. So I would stay looking on the website if that's of interest to you. And we've had speakers come in. We've had people use the data together. And it's open to anyone on campus who's of interest. And then the last one is data storage, sharing, and security. And it's evaluating, prioritize, and implementing campus-wide technologies to support the recommendations. And the overarching goal is to make data easily accessible, reliable, consistent, and secure to support informed planning, decision-making, and communication. So that gives a background. And I should have it tattooed on my forearm, but it's still helpful to have the sheet. So, other questions? No questions? None? Well, I'll put a, oh, shit. I'm sorry, I'm blind. I can't see out of that corner of my eye.
Having come from the financial sector and industry before you came to higher ed, there's a different perspective of records management and data management in other industries than there is in higher education. Mm-hmm. If there's a single learning that you took from that world that you brought here, what would it be? I mean, what is the biggest takeaway? What can we learn from other industries that we may not know or have experience here within higher ed?
That feels like a loaded question, but so one thing I've been thinking a lot, and it also comes with as we're putting in new systems and we're thinking about what it is we keep and what we don't keep, that I think in industry we were much more comfortable about sort of putting a box around the guidelines. And I would say that while we have, so I would say one, our policies were much easier to read, interpret, and act on, right? So we would take a training on record management retention, and it was very easy for me first as an analyst and then as a banker that had certain responsibilities as an officer of the company, and then as a manager, I had a one-pager by my desk, and I knew what I had to keep, what I had to send to central storage, and what I had to keep only until this other formal document came. And it was very easy. That is not my experience here so far. And so in my mind, that was great, right? Because you felt very liberated. You knew what you could get rid of, you knew what you had to keep. And while as things change, there may be something new and interesting that wasn't anticipated. By the next year, when I got my next little laminated card, and it was really easy. And so I think that's one of the things that, as a takeaway, it's how do we digest, right? We have all of you in the room who are really knowledgeable about your documents and subject area. How do we take that and make it easier for people to understand what they should do with the documents? Because I'll just speak for the areas I work with under me. I think we default to keeping everything because we don't know. And that actually creates a lot of confusion. It creates a lot of frustration. It's really expensive as we think about how much space do we have to take up to store stuff? And then even on the electronic records, it makes it really hard to organize and retrieve, right? And so how do we reshift that? So maybe if we kept fewer things and made it clearer what to keep, it would actually be much easier to use that information. So, yeah, Beata.
Is to keep everything, right? Particularly with email. But if you think of the reality of life, and I think at one point during the day the question was asked, how many people actually, go through on a regular systemized basis and, just sort, delete their email, right? Clean their email. And it was a very small number of hands that went up. So are there tools to help you do this, right? Because at the end of the day, most of us, have, during the course of the day, you've received 100 or more emails. And it's difficult enough just dealing with handling the email in terms of responding to it, et cetera. So if there were tools available that would help you so that you only had to open that email once and deal with the recording of it, whatever the process was to either send it somewhere to be recorded, delete it, whatever, as opposed to then by the end of the week, when the weekend comes around, you're saying, gee, I don't have 4 hours of my weekend to sit here reading a week's worth of email and trying to make decisions. And I think that's why people default to, as much as it's inertia, as much as not knowing what to keep and what not to keep. So are there tools, are there technical tools available to manage email? I think that would go a long way to helping us.
So I have a background comment, but I'll say I keep thinking the $1 million idea or the gazillion dollar idea is actually coming up with a better algorithm to sort through the email, because it is a problem. The other thing I would draw to my prior experience is when I first got to Cal, one of my first day impressions was, isn't this great? I can have as much email as I want, right? Because at Bank of America, they were very strict. You can only have this much email, and we're going to force you, and if you don't restrict how much email you have in sent items and stored folders and in your inbox, you can't send anything out. So you were completely crippled, right? And it would be a frantic surge, because of course something really important would happen and you'd be shut down, right? And then it's like, oh crap, how are we going to deal with this? By contrast here, I was like, this is great, I can have as much as I want. Well, this means that I'm not as good as I used to be, right? So systematically, by having the box around it, which I used to think I hated, I was really good about cleaning out my send files, making sure I didn't keep stuff I didn't need, making sure I didn't have extra copies, really systematic about it because of the box. Now that I have no box, I will say I'm not as good as I used to be, and it actually makes me far less efficient because I keep so much stuff. I would also say that in the other environment, we put fewer people on the emails. I've been thinking about this a lot lately, and we didn't use it as our primary vehicle for storing information. So we actually were much better about using things, and I'm very excited about Box because for my team, I think about all the stuff I keep in email because we don't really have a systemized electronic storage place. And so I went in my other companies. Lotus Notes was terrible, but at least it kept everything in an organized fashion. We never really adopted, in my units, a systemized way to store information. And so we've defaulted basically to email and then printing out emails and putting them in binders. And so for us, we're going to use the box as a way to think about that. And what does that mean? And how do we set that up in such a way that's easy for people who've been here a long time, but also easy for a new person or a student worker to find stuff, and using that because we have, at least in my units, completely defaulted to having the record being in the email, and it just exacerbates the problem. Completely inefficient. And then on top of it, what it does is everyone on my floor keeps the final version of something the Chancellor signed, right? And then we get 10,000 emails about where's the document the Chancellor signed, and everyone pulls it out of their Microsoft Outlook. And I've never worked someplace like that before, but everyone does it for self-preservation, right? They don't want to be asked and not know where it is. So that would be a system. I also think it'd be helpful to keep clarifying, and this won't happen overnight, who is the place of record for certain things. And I think that would also help, because if I knew I didn't have to worry about it, and I could go to Ed Denton's shop and say, okay, you're the system of record, we're all going to go to you for XYZ about facilities, I think that would also just help cut down the need to keep all of that, and then to keep CCing everyone on every piece as well. 1 minute. Okay, other questions? One more question, please, please. Oh. All right, well, I will save my minute for another time, and I look forward to hearing more of the work that comes out of this group. So thank you.
Me again. So I'm here to introduce Shel Waggener, our Associate Vice Chancellor of IT and CIO. at least for the next few weeks. We've clearly got a great process going for CIO retention and disposition and disposal policies. Good process going on, but we're very sad to lose Shel as a CIO who's been really put us in a visionary spot on campus in terms of thinking about frameworks and process-based frameworks to look at data, to look at what systems we're investing in and how to pull things closer in sort of a more enterprise fashion than I think we've taken a look at before. So it's been a pleasure working with Shel, and just before he goes, I think it'd be great to get his perspectives on data and records management in particular, seeing what he has over the last 7 years or so on campus. 64 days, months, years, yeah. So anyway, please give Shel a round of applause, thanks.
I can't even remember when I came because I came on sabbatical, a short-term sabbatical. I was at Lucent Technologies, the CIO of the Internetworking Systems Division. And when I got here, after Chancellor Bergeneau was hired and Jack McCready, my predecessor, retired, they had a national search, and I was having so much fun, I decided to apply. And the first year, the first thing that the Chancellor had me do was write up a white paper on what did I see during my first couple years here when I was a short timer. I was just here to help with research computing, really, is why I came for a couple of years. And I went back to look at that recently because I'm doing this transition now. And the number one thing I had on the list, number one, was data management. 9 years ago. Today, it would probably still be number one. And I don't see that as a failing as much as a recognition of the importance of this subject. It's a hard problem to solve. It takes all of us to be involved in one way or another. And there's no easy answers. In fact, the problem is there's too many answers, and we each try, and you make a little bit of progress in little ways. Let me tell you what I think that data management is not, first off. It's one of the failings I had was by listing it as my highest priority. Everybody at the cabinet table, when I did that presentation, basically breathed a sigh of relief and said, oh good, it's a technical problem, somebody else will deal with it. Okay? Lesson learned, okay. So it's not a technology problem, never has been. Technology is one of the attributes, but it's not a technology problem. It's not, in spite of what we've heard today, it isn't really a paper problem or a carbon problem or a money problem. Those are all symptoms of another issue, right? We use all that paper to solve a problem that at its root is different than that. We spend a lot of money to solve this problem, but at its root, you don't really need to spend that much money. The carbon-based impact is a real problem. And when you think about the transportation cost of the paper and all the ink and everything else, I'm sure we would all like to do better. It isn't even a policy problem, although at UC, and since I'm a short timer, I can probably say, the policies probably make the problem worse, not better. And that's because we have too many policies. You couldn't put our policies on a laminated card, right? And you can only retain so much as a person to know what to do. So I'd like you to think about something that CIOs years ago discussed when Internet 2 was first invented, actually, and a bunch of CIOs came together from research universities and said, if we have to work through 1,000 different connectors, if we have to work with all the different telecoms and we have to work across all of our institutions with 20 people between, our researchers, a physicist in New Jersey and a physicist in Switzerland and one in Berkeley, they're not going to be able to work together. And that's the future of research, is being able to work together. So they got together and they said, we need to create this model. And one of the things they said at that time was, some aspects of what we use the network for are really going to change radically. And one of them was voice. And they said, voice is not going to be a phone call. Voice is going to be information that yearns to be free, right? Not the circuit networks, not the idea that you would have to go to a payphone anymore. I mean, we all forget those days. Erin and I were just talking about the revenue that UC used to make off of all of our payphones. Yeah, it's still funding things today, unfortunately, and it's not doing a very good job of it. So I think that the idea of voice yearning to be free has been replaced now by what is really the underlying issue, which is data yearns to be free. Having our data locked up in an archivist vault, in a library, in your email folder, was necessary because that was the only way we could ever get it again. You heard it from Erin. People kept it because they needed to protect themselves, right? We have things in a library because we needed to protect it. You needed to know that you could go get it, right? The archivist had to protect it because we needed to be assured it was there. So at its base, what the problem really is accuracy and speed of access to the data. It's like your backups, right? Nobody needs backups. You just don't need one. You just need the restore, right? Problem is, you don't know when you're going to need the restore, and when you go to do it, if you haven't done the backup, you've got a problem. Well, it's the same thing with the way we think about our data management. We put all these policies in place so we don't ever lose anything. And as a result of doing that, it's too many rules and too much structure, and then we try to keep everything, and in doing so, we lose way too much of it. So one of the things I want to share with you is just the idea that if data yearns to be free, because we all need it and we all want to use it, and we're all going to have our computers and our whole lives with us for here and forevermore, right? These things are going to be laughed at by our kids in the future. You carried around that? That must have weighed 2 pounds, you know? All of that information is going to be there. I put this slide up here because in 2009, I wrote a white paper with Brad Wheeler, who's from Indiana, that really just talked about not that technology was going to revolutionize higher education, but higher education was being revolutionized, and we weren't ready for the impact of that. We weren't ready for the globalization of higher education, right? It used to be that we had the highest balance of trade in our community and our industry of any in the United States. Everybody in the world came to the United States for higher education. Very few people left to go around the world for higher education. We were a huge economic trade balance. Well, today, it's a globalizing market, right? New York University, NYU's opened in Shanghai. Cornell University has just partnered with Technion. They're opening, Israeli University is opening in New York City, right? Carnegie Mellon has a campus in Rwanda. I'm sure you all knew that. You're thinking about visiting there. It's a global world. It's gotten very, very small. And all of the information from all of those institutions, you're all going to be accessing everywhere, all the time. So records management can't be thought of as paper folders and paper files. It can't be thought about as electronic documents. It can't be thought about as an application. It's all going to be data, and more importantly, the information, the metadata about that data. So on the way in, we need to be thinking about the life cycle of it. Does it automatically get deleted? Does it automatically get archived? Because the more you have to think about it, the more likely you're going to end up looking like Erin's email box. The one here, not the one at Bank of America. It just has to be part of the overall ethos. We have to have a life cycle plan. More importantly, because of this. Because it's not going to be Erin's email box in one place on one computer, which, oh, by the way, gets stolen or the coffee cup spills in it, right? It's going to be living in many, many places around the world, in many different formats and in many different venues. I would hazard a guess, how many of you have more than 3 email addresses? Okay, so you probably should talk to somebody because I didn't see your hand go up. So are you using email at all anymore? she's like, there were three. Try not to have 20 million emails in the box because I do IT. The average student arrives at Berkeley now with 1.2 computers per person, right? 98% penetration of cell phones and iPods, right? Information is everywhere, and they don't even think about email at all. They think email's for old people. My daughter often says to me, "You want me to send you an email? Can I just text it to you?" I'm like, it's 100 characters. Well, not the way she types it, No, and she's 18. Right? Email is for old people because that's a very asynchronous form of communication. Right? Instead of it being this think about it. Somebody tweets something and it can go to 30 million people instantly. So what's the record management around that? Records management is just changing. So you have to think about the life cycle of the data, and it doesn't matter where it's emanating from or who's it's supposed to get to it in the context of what you're designing. You just need to assume that every bit of information you're creating is going to be consumed by somebody, and it's going to need a life cycle plan associated with it. And we all need to start thinking about that on the way in so that we don't end up having to do this after the fact, because it's just too hard. In fact, there's a whole new science that's going on that's really becoming a pillar of science around big data. Right? You may have seen recently that one of our faculty members, Mike Franklin, up in the computer science school, just received a grant on big data management and big data research. The idea that search has replaced indexing is now a foregone conclusion for many computer scientists. Because indexing presupposes you understood how the data was going to be found and used in the future. Right? Well, Google believes that you have no idea how it's going to be found and used, and they're not using that taxonomy to sort their information. They're doing multidimensional data analysis on the fly. So when you're typing in something, their search is finding you all the possibilities. Is it as effective or efficient as the Dewey Decimal System? Well, considering how much more Google is indexing through that method, I would say it's not bad. But it's going to keep evolving and keep getting better. So all of our mental models, and the worst, by the way, is IT. We're the worst. Rows, columns, databases, structured, right? If you want access to anything, you got to come through IT. We're all in the position of being in control, so I can tell you exactly where it needs to be. The reality is, you go buy 27 apps on your iPhone before I even can finish writing a line of code. The whole world is changing around, and all of it is based on access to information. Well, I don't know. Angry Birds may not be access to information, but a lot of it is. And with the idea that all this information is going to be free and it's all going to be everywhere, what does that do for our roles and our jobs and our institutions? The faculty member at Stanford that run the robotic course opened up that course online because they decided they were going to try it, so they were going to go from there. They had 100 students in the class. They were opened up. They expected 2,000 students. 80,000 students. Hired 4 graduate students to help. Okay? You don't have to do the math too hard to figure out that 100 students in a physical class, 80,000 students online, over half, by the way, dropped out. So, they only got to 40,000. The economies are so different. That doesn't mean that the impact of having a face-to-face experience is lessened in any way. We've just been able to expose more information, more data, more learning about robotics, in that case, to 80,000 people. Our ETS team here, 10 years ago, began putting stuff online. We've had 150 million views of Berkeley information. Isn't that what we're all about? Right? Getting that out to everybody. So having a model in advance, just thinking about what the life cycle is, and not constricting it by so many policies, under my belief that it yearns to be free, and this includes, we probably all would have been better off if financial data was a little freer out of the financial industry. It includes the private sector as well. WikiLeaks is not there by accident, right? Data wants to get out and wants to be made available, and more often than not, it's going to be. And I don't see it as a security risk, because I'll tell you what, if you knew every time you hit send that email was going to show up in a newspaper, your emails would be a lot better, right? Everything you do could be public and should be public in many contexts based on where we work, but will be public for other reasons. And then finally, I think there's just a concept that we have to think about. The transition is really hard. From where we are right now and where we've been, all of the learning and all of the training, I talk about legacy and IT being legacy all the time. It isn't that our skills are no longer valid. It isn't that our knowledge is no longer valid. It's our process and our methodologies that we did it before. You've got to find a way to break those two things apart so you can start to think, put yourself out 10 years. What's the right way to do it in the future? And we're not going to be 100% accurate. Maybe we'll get 80% of the way there, or 60% of the way there, but we can course correct along the way. But if we keep holding on and investing in the way we've been doing things, we're going to give up an awful lot of forward momentum that our community desperately needs. We've got to get more information out to more people, and we've got to make it easier. It's all about speed, and it's all about accuracy. So I've got a few minutes for questions. Ask me something that I can point over to Erin that she can answer. Questions? Challenges? Yes, ma'am.
The system you're talking about, how do you deal with issues of privacy, student confidentiality, things like grades, social security numbers, student records? And they don't fit into your model of
actually,
information for everyone.
I think they do, because I think part of it is a student's name is not FERPA protected, right? The information in HIPAA doesn't mean that they don't get to send a data element to an insurance company. There are appropriate uses for these things, but those aren't the data, those are the metadata, the information about how you can use it. So when you're designing systems, having a single source data, your name, being registered somewhere as your name, and then allowing that to be reused by multiple systems is a far more effective approach than all of us adding our name. I use name just to emphasize it, but you know how many places we have our students enter their address on this campus? So by and large, if you assume you're designing something and you're the source system and you're going to make that data element available, you'll design a better system than you will if you're going to collect information and assume you're going to protect it all. Some of the elements you'll need to protect because there's regulations and there's privacy issues, et cetera. But many of them you can consume or you can share without fear that they're going to violate privacy. Now, this is one of the problems with something like Google, right? Is in the end, right now, all they need is your birth month and your zip code and there's a third piece of data element, and they'll be able to tell who you are in a zip code. It may be gender. There's 3 data elements that now Google would be able to tell who you are within a zip code. It's really amazing. So you think about protecting our information. So I'm a huge privacy advocate, and I'm the one that signed the Google contract after pushing them for 2 years to get us a contract we could be comfortable with and the protections that we need. But does that mean I'm sanguine about the fact that we're all giving up some privacy? It's a tough balance. I would much rather we protected everything, but that's not the reality of the way the world is moving. So we have to figure out how we're going to separate those data elements we really need to protect from those that more appropriately should be shared. And that's, I think, a much safer model than just assuming you have to protect everything, because in the end, it's like keeping it all in your inbox. You actually do more harm in protecting it by trying to protect all of it than you do by, we can do a better job of limiting and restricting access to certain things than we can to try to do it for everything. So it's not an easy problem to solve, and that's why I'm hoping the computer scientists are going to be able to help us solve some of that. And we already are doing it in some of the data matching now, like Social Security numbers. We have your Social Security number, but that doesn't mean it needs to exist anywhere accessible. We can do cross-pattern hatching. We can do a hashtag to replace. We can do key search enablement. There's a number of things we can do so that it's still a unique identifier. And if you really, really have to have it, we can get it. But by and large, it doesn't need to exist in as many systems as it did before. So it's that same kind of concept. We can reduce the number of exposed elements, but still make the systems more open. If you talk to some of the people at Google, they would just assume there was no privacy. At Facebook, they believe there is no privacy, right? So no, and this is, we can joke about it, but that's the trend things are going. So it is partially incumbent upon places like Berkeley that stand for privacy to make sure that we do things like we did with Google, which is to work really hard with them to educate them about not just what we wanted, but why we wanted it and why we wouldn't yield unless we got it. And in the end, they were helped. Now, other places, they're more comfortable. The economic advantage of using something like Google is so dramatic that it was easier for them to do. For our community, I think we have to stand on that edge of privacy a little more firmly and not give ground quite so much. I don't know if Chris Hoofnagel's in the room, but Chris would, at the Law and Privacy Clinic at Bolt, but he talks a lot about the fact that, information has to be open, but at the same time, privacy is important, and you can live with both. It's a very good question and a very big problem. Other questions?
Shel?
Yeah, last one. Thank you, Bianca.
Can you just talk a little bit about how Google moving to Google is going to change things for us? That would be interesting to hear.
Yeah, I think it's less about Google personally than it is about the whole concept of productivity suites and online tools. you basically will be able to move around all your information to each other, workflow, electronic signing. I dream the day I don't have to sign another piece of paper. Yes, this will be a good thing. And that will be possible. I mean, Box that Erin referred to is a platform that you can add applications into. You can take a document and you can slap a layer on it that says, protect this document. You can slap another layer that says, I want a signature on this document. You can slap another layer on it that says, share this with only these 10 people. But the document itself, the data, is preserved and protected. And so you can layer on things without having to reproduce that same thing. Think about the number of times we reproduce a document just to get that one additional piece of information. Well, with Google, with Box, with these online services in the cloud, you're going to be able to layer them together. And that's really what I'm thinking. So I think your world will change when we have access to sharing this information across a common platform. And where we're focusing, uniqueness, is in identity and access. We want to make sure that your information, you personally, what you can access, who can access your information, that's where our energy is going, not into the, let's say, running a mail server, right? Which Google does, with a few more people than we can afford to do. So I know we've run out of time. Thank you very much for having me here today, and thank you all for contributing your time to this problem. I wish I could stay at Berkeley to solve it, but instead I'm going to be at Internet 2, helping all the research universities who all have the same problem. So I'm not leaving, I'm just segueing to the next step. So thank you all very much.
Well, thank you very much, Shel. That was quite a breath of fresh air. And most of the day I felt like we were slogging through the muck and trying to figure a way out of some very difficult and challenging problems. And I think that it was a nice way. I'm really glad the way the program fell together. It did remind us of what you and I have to do in our daily lives. But I thought that Shel's words to us was a nice leavening to the whole day, and it made me feel very hopeful about the future, although I know we're not there and we won't be there for a while. And I think Shel leaves us with two mantras that we might carry forward with us. I love this notion that data yearns to be free, and I think we should repeat that to ourselves every time we meet and are slogging through the vineyard. And I also like the other mantra, which is transition is really, and I'd say really hard. And I think that leaving us with both of those ideas is a very nice way to end the day. I'd also like to thank our other 16 presenters for a really nice program. I think my needs and my expectations and those of the planning committee were met in delivering, I think, a reasonable facsimile of Electronic Records 101. We've got a lot of ideas. We've learned about a lot of interesting people on campus who are dealing with these issues and these problems, and I think we want to stay in touch. I do. I think all of us should stay in touch as we move forward in dealing with electronic records. A couple things just in terms of what I have noted as we talk today in terms of immediate activities, and I do hope that this is something that we can continue to meet and work on these issues, but there are some immediate things that are really going to be payoffs, I think, moving us along in the not too distant future. One thing will be that this presentation itself, as you know, we've had recorded by ETS, and we'll be sending out a message in the next few days, in the next week or so, to all the participants so you'll know where you can access this, probably on our conference website, but we'll let you know exactly where you can get that for refreshing your memory and perhaps helping us with a follow-up. We're going to have a couple of follow-up surveys. We're going to do an evaluation survey, and you might want to review your notes or the broadcast on the website to help us figure out what should be our next steps. What should we do for follow-up, and how did the conference meet your needs, and what conferences, what additional training programs or workshops would you want to have to move us ahead in the future? There'll also be a second follow-up, which will be, we're sending around a JISC, the Joint Information Services Committee, an intensive survey about information practices on campus as they relate to e-records management. That'll be a second mailing that will be coming out to all the participants, and I hope you'll look at that. It's a detailed inventory. You'll have to take some time with it, but it will help us and future planners in planning more programs of this nature. I also wanted to say, in terms of other outcomes, that we will continue to work, Bancroft Library, IST, and CCRC, and also Human Resources, on what Patrick mentioned as the alfresco test of concept, proof of concept project. And I'm happy to see that he projects a pretty short time frame on that. We'll be plowing ahead for that, and we'll have some results available, he says, hopefully in the next 7 or 8 weeks. I think that's a great outcome. We will have, I want to refer back to Stephen Lau's report. I think it's very important. And for those of you who know about records disposition schedules and those of you who don't, I think one message to carry away is that this is a critical planning and document for us in the future as we move ahead with managing electronic records. There are people on this campus who are on Stephen's revived Records Management Committee. The archivists are on the revised Records Management Committee, and we will be informing you and keeping you informed of all that. And I think an obvious training session or workshop in the future would be, when those schedules are revised, to pull together again this group of people and go over those and learn more about them and how to use them. And I think just basically we're interested in hearing your information, your suggestions about future training, future communications that we can do to advance this issue that's so important to us. I think we have a couple minutes left now, and if there are any more questions or any comments about the program or questions of any of our presenters, I think we could take a few more minutes for that. Do we have anything else anybody wants to add to the afternoon? Yes? Everything that you saw on the screen has been recorded by our ETS folks, and this will be on. We will be sending you a link to the site to find this at.
That'll be distributed in a cubic mile paper.
Anything else? Well, again, thanks for coming, and I hope we can keep in touch and move ahead in the future.